75 meters. That is the distance between a military explosion and an operational nuclear reactor. Not 75 miles, not 75 kilometers, 75 meters. The length of a competitive swimming pool, the width of a football penalty area, a distance a person can cover on foot in under a minute. On the night of April the 4th, 2026, that is how close this war came to becoming something that cannot be undone. Underground ammunition depots beneath Iran's largest naval base in the Persian Gulf began detonating in sequence, one explosion triggering the next, secondary blasts rippling through mountain tunnels reinforced with layers of concrete and steel, the smoke rising high enough to be visible from satellites in orbit, and sitting 75 meters away from all of it. An operational nuclear reactor containing thousands of kilograms of nuclear material, a reactor powering a city of 250,000 people. No radiation leak has been detected, not yet. But the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has expressed what he called deep concern. Russia, Iran's own strategic partner, the country that helped build the very reactor we are talking about, publicly condemned what happened and called for de-escalation. Iran's foreign minister went before the international community and used the words war crime. And the Russian state nuclear corporation that operates the Bushehr plant began evacuating its personnel in buses, nearly 200 people in a single wave. This is what happened at Bushehr on April the 4th, and this story is not just a military story, it is a geopolitical earthquake. It has cracked the foundational doctrine that Iran built its entire defense strategy around for decades. It has changed the calculation over the Strait of Hormuz for every country on earth that depends on oil, and it has put the world in a conversation about nuclear safety that nobody wanted to be having. We are going to walk you through every dimension of this, what was struck, what was lost, what that 75-meter measurement actually means, and where all of this is heading. Before you can understand why the April 4th strike matters so profoundly, you need to understand what Bushehr actually is, because this is not just a naval base. It is the centerpiece of Iran's entire strategic posture in the Persian Gulf. Bushehr Naval Base sits on the southwestern coast of Iran, directly facing the Gulf. It serves as the primary operational hub for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, and as the main staging ground for Iran's fast attack boat fleet, the swarms of small, agile, lethal vessels that form the front line of Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Fast attack boats are Iran's naval doctrine in miniature, cheap, numerous, difficult to defend against, and capable of swarming much larger vessels. Bushehr was the factory and the garage for that entire threat. But what most people don't know, what Iran spent years trying to keep the world from fully appreciating, is what lies beneath the surface at Bushehr. Because the base is not just what you can see from commercial satellite imagery. Beneath the mountain that overlooks the base, Iran constructed a massive tunnel complex, multiple layers of concrete and steel reinforcement, multiple entry and exit points, emergency evacuation systems, automated ammunition transport rails, temperature and humidity controls designed for long-term weapons storage. This is not a warehouse. This is a feat of underground military engineering built specifically to be impervious to conventional aerial bombardment. Inside those tunnels, missile stockpiles, attack drones, drone assembly lines, and the rapid resupply systems that form the logistical backbone of Iran's ability to wage asymmetric warfare across the Persian Gulf. Iran's state television had been broadcasting footage of this kind of infrastructure for years, missiles moving along automated underground rails, rows of drones in the fluorescent glow of tunnel corridors. The message to the world was deliberate: come and strike us. Go ahead. We will survive underground. You cannot reach us down here. And then there is the other thing that sits at Bushehr. The thing that makes everything about this story different from any other strike in this conflict, the nuclear power plant. Iran's only operational commercial reactor sits directly adjacent to the military complex, built with Russian technical assistance, jointly operated by Iranian and Russian personnel, connected to the civilian power grid serving 250,000 people. Russia's state nuclear corporation, Rosatom, was so deeply integrated into this facility that it had hundreds of employees stationed on site. This is the place where underground ammunition depots detonated in sequence for hours on April the 4th. Here is what the evidence shows, based on official statements, satellite imagery analysis, and open-source intelligence assessments released following the strike. The attack targeted both surface infrastructure and underground facilities simultaneously. Craters appeared at the naval base's piers, ships were damaged, hangars, administrative buildings, and surface ammunition stores were struck. United States Central Command subsequently confirmed that the Shahid Mahalati Naval Boatyard in Bushehr, the facility responsible for manufacturing and repairing Iran's fast attack craft, had been severely damaged. CENTCOM's language was precise and unambiguous. The boatyard represented, in their words, a significant portion of Iran's small boat production and maintenance capacity, not a setback, not a dent, a significant portion, gone. But what happened underground is where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The secondary explosions that continued for hours after the initial strike tell a very specific story. Precision munitions struck underground entrances and ventilation systems. The resulting pressure and heat triggered a chain reaction, detonating ammunition stored within the depot complex. The explosions worked inward through the tunnel system, one stored weapon igniting the next, the mountain itself amplifying and channeling the force of successive detonations. Satellite imagery and independent technical analysis revealed craters and partial collapses at multiple points across the underground complex. Iranian state media claimed the damage was limited. Independent assessments told a sharply different story. Technical analysts reached a conclusion with significant implications well beyond Bushehr. Repairing tunnel infrastructure of this scale, mountain engineering at this level of complexity under international sanctions without access to specialized equipment, that is not a project measured in months. It is measured in years. Iran built those tunnels as an impenetrable shield. On April the 4th, that shield cracked. And here is the question that the entire Iranian military establishment is now being forced to confront. If the Bushehr tunnels were breached to this extent, what does that mean for every other underground facility Iran has built? Natanz, Fordo, scattered missile depots across the country, all of them products of the same foundational doctrine, all of them built on the same premise, that going deep enough underground, reinforced with enough concrete and steel, means untouchable. Bushehr was the ultimate real-world test of that claim. And based on what the satellite imagery and technical assessments are showing, the penetration munitions used in the April 4th strike demonstrated capability against hardened underground infrastructure that Iran designed specifically to withstand conventional bombardment. We cannot say with certainty that what happened at Bushehr applies identically to every other underground facility. The depth of the rock varies, the geological composition varies, the reinforcement levels at each site differ, but what cannot be denied is this: the fundamental assumption underlying the entire doctrine, that going underground means going untouchable, has been placed under serious, credible question for the first time. Tehran may now need to reassess not just a single naval base, but the foundational logic of its entire defense architecture. The doctrine of underground invincibility was not just a tactical choice. It was the philosophical bedrock of Iranian military planning for decades. On April the 4th, the secondary explosions rippling through those mountain tunnels may have been the sound of that bedrock beginning to crack. Now, let us talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because Bushehr and Hormuz are inseparable. 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. Every liquefied natural gas carrier, every oil tanker moving from the Persian Gulf to global markets has to squeeze through that narrow choke point. For decades, Iran's ability to threaten that strait was its ultimate strategic trump card, the power to say to any adversary, push us too far, and we will close the tap on 20% of global energy. The fast attack boats that Bushehr built, maintained, and launched, the coastal defense missiles stockpiled in those underground tunnels, the mine-laying operations coordinated from that base, the attack drones assembled in those underground halls. Bushehr was not just one element of Iran's Hormuz threat. It was the coordination hub, the logistical backbone, the engine driving the entire deterrent. That engine has been severely damaged. Following the April 4th strike, military analysts observed a measurable decline in Iranian naval patrol activity in the Persian Gulf. This does not mean Iran's Hormuz card has been entirely eliminated. Iran retains missile capabilities. It has presence at other bases along the coast. But the largest, most organized, most capable infrastructure supporting the rapid deployment of that threat has taken a blow that will not be quickly repaired, and this shift matters far beyond military circles. Oil markets price Hormuz risk. Marine insurance premiums reflect Hormuz risk. Tanker route decisions are made based on Hormuz risk. Regional investment strategies from Riyadh to Singapore incorporate Hormuz risk. The global economy has been recalibrating since the secondary explosion stopped echoing through those tunnels, and since Iran subsequently closed the strait entirely in retaliation for the broader campaign, triggering an energy shock analysts have compared to the 1973 oil embargo. The Bushehr strike directly rewrites the equation that all of those calculations have been running on. Now, the reactor. This is the part of the story that has alarmed the entire world, and it deserves to be told with precision. The Bushehr nuclear power plant was struck near its premises on multiple occasions during the weeks surrounding the April 4th attack. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, confirmed publicly that the facility had been struck or had strikes land in its proximity 4 times since the broader war erupted on February 28th, criticizing what he described as a profound lack of international concern for nuclear safety. On the night of April 4th specifically, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that a projectile struck close to the plant's premises. One member of the site's physical protection staff was killed. A building on site was damaged by shock waves and fragments, and the closest confirmed impact point was 75 meters from the site perimeter, as verified by the IAEA through independent satellite imagery analysis. To be precise on a distinction that matters, the IAEA confirmed 75 meters from the site perimeter. The reactor building itself sits further within that perimeter, but the IAEA was unambiguous that this proximity placed critical auxiliary infrastructure, buildings that may house vital safety systems, directly within the zone of shockwave impact. You cannot strike the perimeter of a nuclear site and be confident that a reactor's safety systems are unaffected. The laws of physics do not honor boundary lines. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi issued an official statement expressing deep concern. He stated explicitly that nuclear sites and the areas immediately surrounding them must never be attacked. He warned that auxiliary buildings on nuclear sites may contain vital safety equipment, that striking structures adjacent to a reactor is not a surgical operation with clean outcomes. He reiterated his call for maximum military restraint near nuclear facilities. The good news, and for now it is holding, is that no radiation leak has been detected. The IAEA confirmed no increase in radiation levels following the April 4th strike. Continuous monitoring is ongoing, but here is what cannot be repeated enough. Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear corporation that built the Bushehr plant and continues to operate it, began evacuating its personnel. Rosatom's director announced that buses had departed from the Bushehr station, 198 people in the largest single evacuation wave, and Rosatom issued a statement categorically condemning what happened and calling on all parties to make every possible effort to de-escalate. Russia, Iran's strategic partner, the country that helped design and build the Bushehr reactor, publicly condemning military activity around it. That is not a routine diplomatic statement. That is Russia sending a signal about how alarmed it is by how close this war has come to a nuclear safety catastrophe. Iran's foreign minister drew a comparison that has gone largely unremarked in Western media, but is generating serious discussion in diplomatic circles. He pointed to the sustained international outrage over Russian military activity near Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant during the Russia-Ukraine war, the emergency UN Security Council sessions, the IAEA declarations, the European statements of alarm, and asked a pointed question: why is that same level of outrage not being directed at what is happening at Bushehr? The European Union, which was vocal about Zaporizhzhia, has been largely silent about Bushehr. That asymmetry is being noticed. It is generating a legitimate and uncomfortable debate about whether international standards of nuclear safety are applied consistently, or whether they are applied selectively depending on which party is perceived as the aggressor in a given conflict. Elsewhere in Iran's declared nuclear infrastructure, the picture is equally sobering. The IAEA has confirmed that Iran's heavy water production plant at Kandab sustained severe damage in a late March strike and is no longer operational. The enrichment facility at Fordo is under observation. The conversion facility at Isfahan has been monitored since early strikes in the campaign. The entire constellation of Iran's declared nuclear sites is now operating under the shadow of an active war, a situation with no modern parallel. The closest analogy is Zaporizhzhia, and that situation alarmed the world for 2 years without a single detonation occurring within the plant's boundaries. At Bushehr on April the 4th, an explosion occurred within 75 meters of an operational reactor's site perimeter. The fact that no radiation leak occurred is not a reason for relief. It is a reason for sober recognition of how narrow the margin was. The head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization wrote formally to IAEA Director General Grossi, stating that the attacks constituted a clear violation of international law and an instance of a war crime. Whatever one's view of Iran's conduct in this conflict, the argument that striking within meters of an operational nuclear reactor raises profound questions of international law is one that even Iran's critics are struggling entirely to dismiss. Let us now look at what the Bushehr strike did to Iran's proxy network, because this dimension of the story has received almost no coverage, and it matters enormously. Bushehr was not purely a conventional military installation. The underground storage facilities beneath the base were part of the logistical infrastructure feeding Iran's regional allies, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. Missiles, drones, ammunition, and guidance system components pass through underground storage facilities like those beneath Bushehr on their way to these proxy forces. The destruction of those stockpiles has likely impacted not only Iran's own direct retaliatory capabilities, but its ability to transfer weapons to its partners at previous rates. Consider the contrast in Iran's behavior before and after April 4th. In the opening weeks of the war that began on February 28th, Iran launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at United States bases and regional infrastructure across the Gulf. That campaign struck at CENTCOM-affiliated facilities in Bahrain, at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, at Camp Buehring in Kuwait, and at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Within the first 2 weeks of the war, damage to U.S. regional bases reached approximately $800 million. Iran's retaliatory actions following the April 4th strike were notably, measurably more limited. That contrast is being closely studied by military analysts. The leading hypothesis is straightforward. The destruction of the underground storage infrastructure at Bushehr reduced the stockpiles available for rapid retaliation. Iran hit back less hard because it had less available to hit back with. The operational tempo of Iran's proxy forces in the weeks that follow will tell much of the story. Against this backdrop, a ceasefire has been announced, and the shape of that agreement tells you a great deal about the strategic position Iran now occupies. On April 8th, The United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire brokered by Pakistan. The United States suspended its strikes conditioned on Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz to safe passage. Iran confirmed that passage through the waterway would be ensured for the duration of the truce through coordination with its armed forces. But here is the revealing detail in Iran's negotiating posture. When a 45-day ceasefire framework was proposed, Iran rejected it. Iran put forward its own terms for a 2-week pause and insisted that any permanent end to the war would require guaranteed security commitments before it would commit to anything longer. Read that carefully. Iran is not asking for a pause to rebuild and regroup. Iran is asking for permanent security guarantees before committing to anything longer term. That is not the negotiating posture of a country that believes time is on its side. That is the posture of a country that has assessed its own damage, looked at the state of its underground infrastructure, and concluded that the longer this war continues, the worse its strategic position becomes. Talks subsequently moved to Islamabad, where the United States sent a high-level delegation led by Vice President J.D. Vance. The negotiations, the highest-level direct engagement between the two countries in nearly half a century, lasted more than 21 hours. They ended without an agreement. Vance told reporters that Iran had chosen not to accept the terms on offer, with the central sticking point being Iran's unwillingness to commit to giving up its nuclear program. President Trump responded by announcing a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and threatening to interdict vessels that had paid fees to Iran for passage. The situation as of this reporting is as precarious as it has been at any point in this conflict. History tells us that when a country's deterrence has been fundamentally shaken, two paths open. The first is escalation, riskier, more unpredictable moves designed to compensate for lost conventional capability, surprise attacks via proxies, cyber operations against critical infrastructure, asymmetric strikes that bypass conventional military logic entirely. The second path is the negotiating table, accepting military realities and seeking a diplomatic exit while some leverage remains. Iran's engagement with the Islamabad process, its initial agreement to reopen the strait, its framing of the nuclear safety issue as a matter of international law, all of these suggested the second path was being taken. The collapse of those talks and the hardening of positions on both sides raises real questions about which path prevails. Let us be precise about what has changed since April the 4th, because clarity matters here. The Hormuz card has not been eliminated, but it has been severely diminished. The largest, most organized, most capable infrastructure supporting that threat has been struck. Iran's ability to rapidly deploy the organized, high-volume Hormuz threat that Bushehr enabled has been compromised in ways that will take years to repair. The underground doctrine has been cracked. The belief that what is buried deep enough is safe from conventional weapons has been placed under the most serious question it has ever faced, that forces Iran to reassess every facility built under that assumption, which means most of its strategic military architecture. The proxy supply chain has been degraded. The destruction of underground stockpiles at Bushehr has likely reduced Iran's ability to arm and resupply its regional networks at the rates seen before April 4th. That degradation is not absolute, but it is real, and it is being watched. And the nuclear safety issue has been elevated to the top of the international agenda in a way that gives Iran a form of leverage it did not choose, but now possesses. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE all lie within the potential fallout zone of a reactor incident. Their governments know this. Diplomatic channels have been activated. The IAEA is watching. Russia is watching with particular alarm. There is one more dimension that cannot be overlooked: time. Before April 2026, Iran could reasonably believe it had the capacity and the time to rebuild its military presence in the Gulf. Sanctions slow things down, but time and engineering can overcome a great deal. That calculation now appears to have shifted. The underground tunnel complex at Bushehr would take years to rebuild under optimal conditions. Under current sanctions, Without access to specialized mountain engineering equipment, the timeline extends further still. The window for Iran to restore its pre-war naval posture in the Gulf is measured in years, not months. The Islamabad talks have collapsed. The ceasefire is technically intact but surrounded by active fire on multiple fronts. Israel has made clear that Lebanon is not covered by the U.S.-Iran pause and has continued operations there. The Strait of Hormuz remains a flashpoint, with the United States now declaring a blockade and Iran warning it will respond to any military incursion harshly. Iran has entered this moment from a position of damaged deterrence rather than confident strength, a doctrine that Iran built over decades, the doctrine of underground invincibility, the belief that burying your military assets deep enough makes you untouchable, has been placed under the most serious question it has ever faced. Bushehr was the ultimate test of that doctrine, the most visible, most dramatic, most consequential test. And on April the 4th, 2026, the secondary explosions that echoed for hours through those mountain tunnels, combined with the knowledge that a nuclear reactor sat within meters of the closest impact point, may have marked the moment when an entire strategic era began its end. The ceasefire is holding for now, the reactor is intact for now. But this story is not over, not even close.